Muslim woman denied a job, then returns as her boss's boss. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The office was sleek and modern, filled with the hum of clicking keyboards and murmuring voices. The glass walls reflected the city skyline, but Aisha wasn't focused on the view. She sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped together, her resume resting neatly on her lap. This job meant everything to her. After years of hard work, top of her class in business school, multiple internships, glowing recommendations, she was finally sitting in the office of Hamilton & Company, one of the top finance firms in the country. She had spent months preparing for this moment. The receptionist called her name. "Miss Aisha Rahman, please follow me." She stood, smoothing her navy blue blazer and adjusting her hijab before following the receptionist to the interview room. Inside, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and a smug expression sat behind the desk, flipping through her resume without looking up. His nameplate read, Michael Thompson, hiring manager. He barely acknowledged her as she took a seat. "All right, Miss Rahman," he said, sighing as if he were already disinterested. "Tell me why you think you'd be a good fit here." Aisha sat up straight. "I have a degree in finance from Northwestern, graduated at the top of my class, and completed internships with 2 leading firms where I specialized in corporate investments." Michael barely glanced at her resume. Aisha continued, ignoring his dismissive tone. "I've been passionate about financial strategy since I was a student. I thrive in high-pressure environments and I believe my analytical skills." Michael cut her off with a forced chuckle. "Listen, Miss Rahman. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're looking for someone who can fit into our corporate culture." Aisha's brow furrowed. "I understand, sir. I assure you, I'm a team player and adaptable to any professional environment." Michael leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Let's be honest here. Clients have certain expectations. We need employees who project the right image." The words stung. Aisha knew exactly what he meant. She forced herself to remain composed. "I don't believe my appearance or background should affect my ability to perform in this role." Michael sighed, tossing her resume onto the desk. "Look, I won't waste your time. You're clearly intelligent, but this isn't the right place for you." Aisha's throat tightened. "Is it because I wear a hijab?" Michael smirked. "Of course not. But let's be real. Clients in this industry expect a certain presentation. We need employees who don't stand out too much." Aisha clenched her jaw. "Don't stand out." That was his way of saying, "We don't want someone like you here." She took a slow breath, willing herself to stay professional. "I see. Thank you for your time." Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, just some advice. If you really want to make it in this industry, you might want to consider blending in a little more." Aisha stood up, her hands shaking with frustration. She wanted to say something, wanted to call him out. But she knew. If she reacted emotionally, he'd use it as proof that she wasn't the right fit. Instead, she extended her hand. "I appreciate your feedback." Michael hesitated, then shook her hand with a smirk. "Good luck out there." Aisha walked out of that office humiliated, but not broken. As she stepped outside into the bustling city streets, she made herself a promise. One day she would return. And when she did, she wouldn't be asking for a job. She'd be the one in charge. Aisha walked out of Hamilton & Company with her head high, but inside she felt a storm brewing. She had done everything right. She had the qualifications, the experience, and the drive. But none of that mattered to people like Michael Thompson. He hadn't rejected her because of her skills. He had rejected her because of who she was. As she walked through the crowded streets, her phone buzzed. A message from her best friend, Nadia. "Nadia, how did it go?" Aisha hesitated before typing back. "Aisha, not great. He didn't even give me a chance." Seconds later, Nadia's name flashed on her screen. Aisha sighed and answered. "Hey, what happened?" Nadia's voice was sharp with concern. Aisha leaned against a bus stop. "He basically told me I wasn't the right image for the company. And then," she swallowed, anger creeping in, "he told me I should blend in more if I wanted to succeed." Nadia gasped. "He actually said that?" "Not in those exact words. But he made it very clear." Silence hung between them. Then Nadia's voice softened. "So, what now?" Aisha straightened. She had 2 choices. She could sit in her disappointment and let people like Michael dictate her future. Or, "I'm going to make sure he regrets ever looking down on me." Nadia let out a low whistle. "Now that's the Aisha I know." Aisha smiled despite everything. "I'll talk to you later." I need to figure out my next move. She ended the call and looked up at the city skyline. She wasn't done. Not even close. Starting from the bottom. Over the next few weeks, Aisha sent out dozens of applications. Rejections piled up. Some firms were polite. Others were blunt. But then, finally, one company responded. Rahman Financial Solutions welcomes you for an interview. Aisha had never heard of them before, but she wasn't about to be picky. She arrived at their office, a modest but professional firm run by entrepreneurs who valued talent over appearances. Her interview went nothing like the one at Hamilton & Company. They asked her about her experience, her vision, her skills. They actually listened. And 2 days later, she got the job. It wasn't a huge firm, but it was a start. And Aisha? She was about to make the most of it. Rising through the ranks, Aisha worked harder than ever. She came in early, stayed late, and took on projects no one else wanted. She studied trends, helped secure high-value clients, and quickly became the firm's top performer. Within 2 years, she was promoted to senior financial analyst. By year 4, she was one of the youngest executives in the company. Clients trusted her. Employees respected her. And soon, other firms started noticing her name. Big firms. Powerful firms. And then one day she got an offer she never expected. The opportunity of a lifetime. A senior partner at Gibson & Wells, a top competitor of Hamilton & Company, reached out. They wanted to offer her a director position. Aisha sat in disbelief as she read the email. This wasn't just a job. This was her chance to stand on the same playing field as the company that once rejected her. She met with the board of Gibson & Wells a week later. They knew her worth. They respected her for her mind, her expertise, her results, not for how she looked. And when she signed that contract, she knew she was just getting started. Because her next goal? Becoming the boss of Hamilton & Company itself. Aisha sat in her corner office at Gibson & Wells, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. Director of Financial Strategy. A title she had earned. A title that put her in direct competition with Hamilton & Company. And that was exactly what she wanted. As she sipped her coffee, her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Rahman, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Aisha nodded. I'll be right there. She grabbed her tablet and headed to the conference room, her heels clicking against the polished floors. The board members greeted her with nods of respect as she took her seat. The CEO, Mr. Patel, smiled. Aisha, why don't you take the lead on this one? She nodded, bringing up the latest acquisition reports. We have a new opportunity, she began. A mid-sized firm is looking for a merger. They've been struggling financially, but with our resources, they could become a powerful asset. One of the board members, an older man, leaned forward. Which firm? Aisha tapped the screen, and the company's name appeared on the projector. Hamilton & Company. The room went silent. Aisha folded her hands on the table, her expression unreadable. They're bleeding money. Their leadership is weak. Their hiring practices? Questionable. But they still hold a recognizable brand name. The CEO studied her. You want us to acquire them? Aisha's lips curved slightly. Not just acquire. Restructure. Clean house. And rebuild it under our leadership. The board murmured amongst themselves. Mr. Patel grinned. I like it. And just like that, Aisha was about to own the company that once rejected her. The day of the takeover. Hamilton & Company had no idea what was coming. They had been struggling for months, losing clients, losing market share. So when Gibson & Wells offered a buyout, they had no choice but to accept. Michael Thompson, still the hiring manager after all these years, was in a panic. What's happening? He asked his supervisor, sweat forming on his brow. His boss sighed. We're being absorbed. New leadership is coming in. Michael scoffed. New leadership? He shook his head. They better not change too much. We have a system here. His boss gave him a strange look. Michael, you might want to tread carefully. Michael frowned. What's that supposed to mean? His boss sighed. The new executive overseeing this transition? Michael folded his arms. Yeah? His boss hesitated before saying, Aisha Rahman? The words hit like a slap to the face. Michael's smirk vanished. His mouth went dry. No, it couldn't be. But as he turned toward the entrance, he saw her. Walking into the building, surrounded by a team of executives, confident, powerful, unstoppable. And she was here to take everything he once controlled. Michael's pulse raced as he stood frozen near the entrance of the office. It had to be a joke. There was no way the same woman he had dismissed all those years ago was now walking in as the new boss. But it was her. Aisha Rahman, elegant, composed, and exuding authority. She didn't hesitate. She owned the room the moment she stepped inside. Employees whispered as she passed. Some recognized her. Some had no idea who she was. But Michael knew. And the sinking feeling in his stomach told him that he was in trouble. Aisha takes over. A meeting had been called. All department heads, senior managers, and executives were required to attend. Michael sat in the boardroom, sweat beading at his temple. Aisha entered, setting her files on the table. She took her time, looking each person in the eye before finally settling into her seat at the head of the table. The seat where the real power sat. She clasped her hands together. "Let's get started." A senior executive, Mr. Lawson, cleared his throat. "Ms. Rahman, welcome. We understand that Gibson and Wells now owns a majority stake in Hamilton and Company. What are your plans for restructuring?" Aisha nodded. "First, I want to make one thing clear. This company is no longer operating under the leadership you once knew." Michael stiffened. Aisha continued. "We are here to make this a place of excellence and inclusion, where talent is rewarded and discrimination is not tolerated." Michael felt the room shift. The old way of doing things? Gone. And then, Aisha's gaze landed directly on him. Michael's reckoning. "Mr. Thompson." Michael flinched as his name rolled off her tongue. He forced a weak smile. "Ms. Rahman. It's good to see you again." Aisha didn't smile back. She tilted her head slightly. "Funny. You didn't seem too pleased to see me last time we spoke." Michael swallowed hard. Aisha picked up a folder. "Let's talk about your hiring practices." The air in the room grew tense. Michael shifted in his seat. What do you mean?" Aisha opened the file. "I had our HR team pull records from the past decade. Your department has consistently rejected candidates from diverse backgrounds at a significantly higher rate than industry standards." Michael's face turned pale. Aisha flipped to another page. "You personally conducted interviews where over 90% of your hires fit a very specific profile." Michael's voice cracked. I was just hiring the best candidates." Aisha's tone remained calm. "Really? Because you rejected me despite my qualifications." Silence. Michael's breath hitched. Aisha continued, "But you didn't just reject me. You told me I didn't fit the image of this company. You suggested I'd blend in if I wanted to succeed." She leaned forward slightly. "So tell me, Mr. Thompson, does my success blend in enough for you now?" The room went silent. Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to disappear. The smugness he once carried? Gone. The power he once had? Shattered. And the worst part? He had no defense. The verdict? Aisha closed the folder. "Effective immediately, Mr. Thompson, you are being placed on indefinite leave while we conduct a full review of your hiring practices." Michael's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? You can't just..." Aisha raised a brow. "Oh, I can. And I just did." Michael's breathing turned shallow. "Ms. Rahman, please, I've been here for over 20 years. I built this department." Aisha didn't blink. "And that's exactly why it needs a fresh start." Michael's world crumbled. He had held power for so long, and now it was gone in an instant. He wasn't just losing his job. He was being erased from the company's future. And Aisha Rahman, the woman he once dismissed, was the one doing it. Michael sat frozen in his chair, his breath shallow, his mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. He had been untouchable for years. And now, the woman he had once mocked and dismissed was sitting across from him, deciding his fate. Aisha didn't flinch. She didn't revel in his downfall. She simply did what needed to be done. The rest of the executives watched in silence. No one defended him. Because deep down they all knew. Michael Thompson had been a problem for years. And now, he was finally being held accountable. Michael tries to fight back. He gripped the arms of his chair, forcing himself to speak. This is outrageous. You can't just push me out. I've given my life to this company." Aisha tilted her head. "Have you? Or have you spent your career making sure people like me never got the same opportunities?" Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because he knew she was right. Aisha continued, her tone steady. "I built my career despite people like you. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. And yet, here I am." She leaned forward slightly. "And where are you, Mr. Thompson?" Michael's face burned. He had no power left. Nothing to bargain with. And he knew it. Cleaning house. Aisha turned back to the rest of the room. "This company will not survive with the same outdated mentality that brought it to the brink of failure. Things will change. And that starts today." The executives nodded in agreement. Aisha continued, her voice calm but firm. We will be implementing new hiring policies. We will be creating a diverse leadership board. And we will ensure that no one else is ever turned away for not fitting the image. She stood up, smoothing out her blazer. This is no longer Hamilton and Company as you knew it. Her eyes flicked to Michael. This is now a company where the best people rise, no matter who they are. Michael's last stand. Michael's fingers curled into fists. His whole career, gone. His power, gone. His reputation, destroyed. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. You'll regret this. Aisha raised an eyebrow. Will I? Michael's chest heaved. He turned to the other executives, desperate for support. But no one said a word. They weren't going to risk their own careers for him. Michael's lips trembled. He had lost. And the worst part? Aisha didn't even look angry. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here to lead. Michael swallowed hard, grabbing his briefcase. Without another word, he stormed out of the room. And just like that, he was done. Aisha's victory. As soon as the door closed behind Michael, Aisha let out a slow breath. She had imagined this moment for years. But now that it was here, she realized something. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to humiliate him. She had already won. She had taken the very company that rejected her and turned it into something better. Something stronger. Something that would finally give people a chance, no matter who they were. And that was the greatest victory of all. The aftermath. Word spread quickly that Michael Thompson had been removed. The employees who had been overlooked, dismissed, and discriminated against? They felt a shift in the air. Aisha wasn't just talking about change. She was making it happen. And the world was watching. Aisha stood in front of the large glass windows of her office, looking out at the city skyline. The same city where she had once walked into a job interview, filled with hope, only to be dismissed for how she looked. Now she stood at the top. Not because of revenge. Not because of luck. But because she had earned it. Her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Rahman, the press is here for your statement. Aisha nodded, turning around. I'm ready. The press conference. Cameras flashed as Aisha stepped up to the podium. Reporters leaned forward, notebooks open, microphones raised. She took a deep breath before speaking. Hamilton and Company is no longer the company it used to be. Today we move forward with a new vision. One that values talent, hard work, and diversity. She paused, scanning the room. For too long, companies like this have excluded people based on superficial judgments. That ends today. The room was silent. Then a reporter raised a hand. Ms. Rahman, do you have any words for those who once doubted you? Aisha smiled slightly. Yes, thank you. The reporters exchanged surprised glances. Aisha continued, because every roadblock, every rejection, and every closed door only pushed me to work harder. And today I stand here, not in spite of those obstacles, but because of them. Flashes went off as the room erupted in applause. Aisha had taken the very system that tried to shut her out and rebuilt it from the inside. And now, she was leading it. 1 year later, a new era begins. Hamilton and Company had changed. Under Aisha's leadership, the company was thriving. Their new hiring policy set a standard in the industry. They built mentorship programs to help young professionals from diverse backgrounds break into finance. Their profits had soared. And most importantly, no one would ever be turned away for not fitting the image again. Aisha's full circle moment. One evening, Aisha walked through the halls of her company, stopping at the very interview room where it had all begun. She ran a hand over the polished table, remembering how small she had once felt sitting there. But now, she was on the other side. Aisha took a deep breath, then smiled. She had rewritten the story, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And this was only the beginning. Final scene, inspiring the next generation. Somewhere in a small apartment, a young Muslim woman scrolled through her phone. She stopped at an article titled, Aisha Rahman, the CEO who changed the game. Her eyes widened as she read about Aisha's journey, from rejection to power. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because if Aisha could do it, so could she. And that was the true legacy Aisha had built. The world had changed. And so had Aisha Rahman. 5 years after taking over Hamilton and Company, she had transformed it into one of the most respected, inclusive, and high-performing financial firms in the industry. She had been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and Time's Most Influential Leaders. She had mentored young professionals, fought for equal opportunities, and reshaped the way corporate hiring worked. But now, she faced a new challenge. And this time, it wasn't about Michael Thompson or proving herself. This time, it was about fighting for something bigger. A corporate scandal emerges. Aisha sat in her penthouse office, scanning the latest reports. Her assistant, Ryan, stood nearby, shifting nervously. "Ms. Rahman, you need to see this." He handed her a folder marked confidential. She flipped it open. Her stomach dropped. One of their major subsidiaries, Phoenix Capital, was under investigation. Charges of fraud, insider trading, and unethical lending practices were surfacing. Aisha's jaw tightened. She had built this company with integrity, and now someone had tainted it from within. She took a slow breath. Who's responsible? Ryan hesitated. It looks like several high-level executives, including a name you might recognize. He flipped the page. Aisha's eyes widened. Michael Thompson, her former enemy, her disgraced ex-hiring manager, had somehow clawed his way back into power, and now he was at the center of a corporate scandal. Aisha exhaled. So, Michael didn't learn his lesson. Ryan shook his head. Apparently not. Aisha's eyes darkened. Then it was time to teach him again. Launching the investigation. Aisha acted fast. She assembled a crisis response team. Top lawyers, PR strategists, compliance officers. She called for a full-scale audit of Phoenix Capital's dealings. This is not just about damage control, she told her team. If Michael Thompson and his people have been committing fraud under our name, we will not protect them. She made one thing very clear. She would not allow corruption to exist under her leadership, no matter how many powerful people it exposed. And Michael? His downfall was coming. Again, Michael tries to escape. Across the city, Michael Thompson sat in his private office, frantically making calls. He had barely survived after being fired from Hamilton and Company. And now, he was about to lose everything again. His phone rang. A familiar voice came through. Aisha Rahman. Michael's throat tightened. Aisha. Her voice was calm, controlled, but lethal. You should have learned your lesson, Michael. Michael gritted his teeth. I don't know what you think you found, but Aisha cut him off. Save it. The investigation is already underway. It's over, Michael. Silence. Then, for the first time, Michael realized he had already lost. Cliffhanger, the truth will come out. Aisha hung up the phone. She turned to Ryan. Schedule a press conference. If there's corruption, we're going to expose it ourselves. Ryan nodded. And Michael? Aisha's lips curled into a slight smirk. We let the law handle him this time. As the city skyline glowed behind her, she knew one thing. She had won before, and she was about to win again. The press conference room was packed. Reporters, industry leaders, and financial analysts all sat on edge, waiting for the statement from Aisha Rahman. She stood at the podium, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her expression serious but composed. Cameras flashed as she cleared her throat and began. Good morning. I'm here today to address the investigation into Phoenix Capital, a subsidiary under our corporate umbrella. Recent reports indicate serious misconduct, including fraudulent practices and insider trading. As CEO, I take full responsibility for ensuring transparency, and I will not tolerate corruption in any capacity. The room went silent. Reporters furiously typed notes. Aisha continued, her voice unwavering. After a thorough internal audit, we have confirmed that these allegations are valid. The executives involved in this scandal have been identified and will face immediate termination, as well as legal repercussions. She paused, then delivered the final blow. One of the key figures at the center of this corruption is Michael Thompson. The press erupted. Flashes went off. Shocked murmurs filled the room. Michael Thompson, the disgraced former hiring manager of Hamilton and Company, had not only failed upwards, but had also been exposed once again. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Rahman, what actions are you taking against Mr. Thompson? Aisha's expression remained unreadable. Legal action has already been taken. He will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. She let the words sink in. Michael Thompson's career was over. For good this time. Michael's downfall. Michael sat in his office, gripping his phone with white knuckles. His inbox was flooded with emails from lawyers, board members, and government investigators. He was being sued for fraud, insider trading, and corporate misconduct. He had no allies left. No backup plan. Nowhere to run. His phone rang. His lawyer. Michael took a shaky breath and answered. "Michael," the lawyer said, his voice heavy with finality. "It's over?" Michael's stomach dropped. I can fight this," he stammered. "I have connections, I can—" "Not this time." Michael sank into his chair. The walls were closing in. And the worst part? Aisha Rahman had won. Again. Aisha's victory, but not her endgame. Later that evening, Aisha sat in her office, watching the news coverage of the scandal. She had done it. She had taken down Michael Thompson twice. But for her, this was never about one man. It was about changing the system. Ryan knocked on her door. "Ms. Rahman, your next meeting is ready." Aisha nodded, closing her laptop. "Let's get to work. Because this was just the beginning of her next battle." Aisha leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she listened to her executive team discuss the fallout from the Phoenix Capital scandal. The company had survived, but the damage was still fresh. Her name was all over the news. Some called her a hero, others questioned if she had known all along. She knew how the world worked. If a woman in power made one mistake, people would use it to tear her down. But she wasn't about to let that happen. She had fought too hard to be here. And now she was about to make an even bigger move. The next step, Aisha goes global. Hamilton and Company had been rebuilt under Aisha's leadership. But she wanted more than just a successful firm. She wanted lasting change. She called a meeting with her top executives. "We've established ourselves as a leader in ethical finance. But now we need to think bigger. I want to expand into global markets." Some executives nodded eagerly. Others looked hesitant. One of them, Mr. Calloway, cleared his throat. "Ms. Rahman, expanding internationally is a huge risk. We've only just recovered from the Phoenix Capital incident. Are you sure this is the right time?" Aisha's gaze didn't waver. "The right time is when you create it." She turned to the presentation screen. "This is our 5-year roadmap. We will expand into London, Dubai, and Singapore. We will become a global leader, not just in finance but in corporate responsibility." The executives exchanged glances. Then, slowly they nodded in agreement. Aisha had never backed down from a challenge. And she wasn't about to start now. A familiar face resurfaces. A week later, as Aisha prepared for a conference in London, her assistant Ryan walked into her office looking uneasy. "Aisha," he said carefully, "you're going to want to see this." He handed her a newspaper. The headline made her freeze. "Disgraced former executive Michael Thompson resurfaces in Dubai Investment Group." Aisha narrowed her eyes. Michael had managed to slip through the cracks, again. And now, he was trying to rebuild his career in one of the very markets she was about to enter. Ryan exhaled. "He's like a cockroach?" Aisha smirked. "And I've gotten really good at exterminating problems." She tossed the newspaper onto her desk. "Book me a flight to Dubai." Because if Michael thought he could escape her, he was wrong. Cliffhanger, Aisha versus Michael Round 3. Michael Thompson sat in a high-rise office in Dubai, sipping a glass of whiskey. He had barely survived the scandal in the US. But here he had new allies, new money, and a new reputation. He smirked, staring out at the city skyline. No one could touch him now, or so he thought. Because halfway across the world, Aisha Rahman was already on her way. And this time, she wasn't just taking down a corrupt executive. She was about to end him for good. The Dubai skyline gleamed under the desert sun, its towering skyscrapers a symbol of wealth and power. But Aisha Rahman wasn't here to admire the view. She was here to finish what Michael Thompson started. She sat across from her legal and financial team in a private conference room. "Michael Thompson has managed to secure a position with a major investment firm here," Ryan explained, sliding a file toward her. She skimmed through it, her expression sharp. The firm, Alder & Rowe Capital, had invested heavily in real estate, oil, and international banking. And Michael? He had wormed his way into their executive board. Ryan continued, "He's been rebranding himself as an expert in financial restructuring. He's even trying to court international investors." Aisha let out a slow breath. Michael wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. And if she didn't stop him now, he'd do it all over again. Aisha closed the file and looked at her team. "I want everything on Alder & Rowe. Their financials, their legal history, their weak spots." Ryan nodded. "Understood." Aisha's eyes darkened. "Let's show Michael what happens when you cross me one too many times." Michael's world starts crumbling. Michael Thompson adjusted his tie, flashing a confident smile as he shook hands with investors at a high-end networking gala. He had done it. He had escaped the US scandals and reinvented himself. No one in Dubai cared about his past failures. Here, he was a rising star again, until his phone buzzed. He glanced at the notification. Then his heart stopped. Breaking news. Michael Thompson linked to international financial fraud. Exclusive report from CO Ayesha Rahman. Michael's hand tightened around his glass. No, not again. He pulled up the full article. Ayesha's team had exposed him. His shady dealings, his history of corruption, and his involvement in insider trading back in the US. His investors were pulling out. Alder and Rose stock was tanking. People were staring at their phones. Whispers filled the room. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears. Then, as if the final dagger had been plunged into his chest, Ayesha Rahman walked in. Dressed in a powerful white suit, her presence commanding the room. Michael's breath caught. She strode toward him, every step deliberate. Michael's lips parted, his face pale. Ayesha. She held up a hand. No need, Michael. I'm just here to watch the inevitable. Michael's throat tightened. Security approached him. Sir, one of them said firmly, we need you to leave. Michael looked around. The investors who once praised him now avoided his gaze. His colleagues whispered. He was finished. For real this time. Ayesha's final victory. Later that night, Ayesha stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out over the Dubai skyline. Ryan walked up beside her. It's done. Michael's been removed from the board. Alder and Rowe is cutting ties with him completely. Ayesha nodded. Good. Ryan smirked. You really don't leave any loose ends, do you? Ayesha took a slow sip of her tea. When people like Michael exist, you don't leave them room to come back. Ryan chuckled. So what now? Ayesha smiled slightly. We expand. We grow. And we keep building a world where people like Michael never hold power again. Ryan nodded. To the future, then. Ayesha raised her glass. To the future. Final scene, a legacy secured. Ayesha Rahman had started as an outsider. A woman dismissed, overlooked, and told she didn't belong. Now, she was one of the most powerful financial leaders in the world. And the industry would never be the same again. Because the next generation of women, of Muslim professionals, of those who were told they didn't belong, would look at her and know they could win too. And that was the greatest victory of all. 5 years had passed since Ayesha ended Michael Thompson's career for good. In that time, her empire had only grown. Hamilton and Company had transformed into a global leader in ethical finance. Her foundation, the Rahman Initiative, provided mentorship, scholarships, and funding for underprivileged women pursuing careers in finance, law, and business. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a movement. The recognition she never expected. Ayesha sat at her desk, scrolling through emails when a subject line caught her eye. Nomination for the Nobel Prize in Economics. Her breath hitched. She opened the email. Her work in corporate ethics and financial justice had been recognized on a global scale. Ryan walked in holding a stack of documents. Ayesha, we need to finalize the... He stopped when he saw the look on her face. What happened? Ayesha turned the screen toward him. Ryan read the email. His eyes widened. You're kidding? Ayesha smiled slightly. Apparently not. Ryan grinned. Ayesha Rahman, Nobel Prize nominee. Has a nice ring to it. Ayesha laughed softly. She had never chased awards. Her work wasn't about recognition. But this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been told they didn't belong. And now, she was about to stand on the world stage. Michael's final fate. Meanwhile, across the world, Michael Thompson sat in a dimly lit apartment, staring at the TV. The news anchor was talking about Ayesha Rahman's nomination. Michael's hands tightened into fists. He had lost everything. His reputation, his wealth, his power. Now, he was just another forgotten executive whose name had become a cautionary tale. And the worst part? Ayesha had never looked back, because she had moved forward, and he had faded into nothing. Ayesha's speech, a moment in history. Months later, Ayesha stood on one of the biggest stages in the world, delivering a speech at the Nobel Prize ceremony. She took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. I was once told I didn't belong, she began. That success was for a different kind of person. That I should change who I was if I wanted to make it. She smiled slightly. They were wrong. Applause filled the hall. She continued, her voice strong. Success doesn't belong to any one group. It belongs to those who are willing to fight for it. And when you break a barrier, you don't close the door behind you. You hold it open for the next person. The audience rose to their feet. Aisha Rahman had changed the world. And the best part? She was just getting started. The world had changed. And at the center of that change stood Aisha Rahman. Her name had become synonymous with resilience, leadership, and justice. She had taken an industry once ruled by old power and redefined it on her terms. Her company, now rebranded as Rahman Global Holdings, had offices in New York, London, Dubai, and Singapore. She had built not just a company but a revolution. And it was only the beginning. A young girl's dream begins. In a small apartment in Chicago, a young girl named Layla scrolled through her phone. She stopped at a video of Aisha's Nobel Prize speech. Her eyes sparkled with hope. She turned to her mother, a seamstress who had worked tirelessly to provide for her. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think I could be like her one day?" Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "She was once a girl just like you, wasn't she?" Layla grinned. And that's when she knew. Her dreams weren't impossible. Because Aisha Rahman had paved the way. Aisha's final reflection. Standing on the rooftop of her Dubai headquarters, Aisha looked out at the skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars. Ryan stood beside her, holding 2 glasses of tea. "To the future?" he asked. Aisha smiled, accepting the glass. "To the future," she echoed. She had won battles. She had defeated enemies. But most importantly, she had built something greater than herself. And long after she was gone, her legacy would still stand. Because when the world had told her she didn't belong, she had proved them all wrong. And now, she belonged everywhere. Final shot, the next generation. Somewhere in the world, a young woman in a business suit stepped into a corporate office for an interview. She adjusted her hijab, stood tall, and walked in with confidence. Because she knew. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was following in the footsteps of the woman who had changed everything. And one day, she would change the world too.